Greetings, everybody. Fanatical Dragon here once again, and immensely excited and delighted to be joined by the wonderful FJ Desanto. Hello, FJ.
Hello, Johnny. Thank you for having me.
Man. No, honestly, dude.
This is a treat. No, after watching all these videos, to be on it's wild.
Well, I feel I would be remiss if I didn't, because I've spoke to Frank, and you are Frank's sometimes partner in crime.
Sidekick. I'm really his sidekick. He very fortunate for me, invited me into this little world that connects to what was a significant part of my childhood. So to revisit all this stuff and meet all the people like you who are, fans of it also is just thrilling for me. It's a whole new world for something that's very special to me. But
you've jumped in as if you've been doing this your whole life.
Because I never shut up about these movies. So, it's very easy to, watch them and talk about them. And Frank's good at, setting up the sort of parameters. He does. I didn't watch his video yet because I hear him talk all day. But he does such extensive notes on every movie that he sends me in advance. So I know how to sort of play off him at this point. And so it's a lot of fun. Like, I learned so much just even when I save all these things he sends me, the notes, because it's just like historical stuff. And yeah, he's great to bounce off of. And I feel really lucky that he asked me to do it.
I think it works really well. I think in both cases, because he's done a bunch with you and he's done quite a few with Michael Worth too. And I love Frank's solo commentaries, but sometimes he moves at a clip that's hard to keep up with. Like, he packs so much into his solo ones that I think sometimes when he's got someone else there, it makes him slow his rope a little bit. And I think it becomes overall a slightly richer experience.
It knocks him out. Like it's for him, it's like a real, for me, it's like hanging out in the pub and, talking to an old friend about movies. But for him, because he's really the dean of this stuff. That's what I always call him, the dean of Hong Kong cinema. Yeah. And he, the physical aspect of it, of making sure, he takes it so seriously in a good way that he wants to make sure that the information's accurate and it's all there, and that it all gets out there, because how many more of these are going to happen? Next will be streaming. Like, we're sort of in the last phase of the physical media era. Yeah. With these. I would agree. And next are going to be. Hopefully the same thing still on streaming and stuff like that. But to hold them and all that stuff is amazing. And I think Frank takes that very, very seriously and allows me to be the comedian. Like he'll sit there and go, here's the entire history of this actor, and I'll be like, watch them do this great kick.
I think you sell yourself a little short, but because he started bringing you in for the Jackie ones, didn't he?
Because my whole childhood was the Jackie stuff, and I met Frank when I was a kid. I've known Frank 30 years, maybe.
Where did you guys meet? Was it through the New York Film Festival?
No, we met before that. When he was at Tai Seng, we met because now I got to give you a little bit of my life story.
That's what I was hoping for.
So. And it'll connect. So there's a bunch of sort of key players in that. So when I was very, very young, the advantage of living in New York was we had the Kung Fu cinema on TV every Saturday. And that was my introduction initially to the Shaw Brothers stuff. And then occasionally like a weird thing would drop in there, like a Bruce movie or like Fearless Hyena would show up, right? And the advantage, again, of living in New York is we had New York Chinatown in Manhattan. And I was obsessed with it as a kid for some reason, and martial arts and all that stuff. So I was able to buy like those Bruce and Jackie Hong Kong books, those magazines that they did, and I had a whole collection of them. And so I hadn't at this point really seen a lot of Jackie stuff. This is probably early '80s and late '70s, early '80s, like that kind of thing. So what happened was, like, I think it's like 1982. So I'm probably like 9 years old. I went to there's a martial arts supply store in Chinatown. It's still around, which is crazy. They're probably now 45 years. And they always had like the Bruce posters, the Jackie posters, and you could buy all the equipment, the weapons, the throwing stars and nunchucks and stuff. And they had a book, and it was Rick Meyer's book.
From Bruce Lee to Ninjas.
From Bruce Lee to the Ninjas.
Yeah.
And I bought that book. Or I got it for a birthday or something, and I was obsessed with it. So it has to be later than that because Project A's in it. Project A is 1983 because that was the first time I knew about like Project A and stuff. So maybe it's a little later. I'm like 12 years old around, but the interest. So I voraciously read it, and it filled in a lot of blanks as to who these people were that I was watching and all that stuff. And what happened was, and Rick is sort of the catalyst for all this stuff. So in the back of the book, it said the author welcomes correspondence from people. Here's a P.O. box. And I wrote him, I want to know more about this world.
Age 12, 13?
Yeah. A million years later, he's at my wedding and I saw him 3 years ago in Tokyo. And subsequently he wrote me back, and that led to sort of like a pen pal thing. But what he was doing a fanzine at the time called MAMA, Martial Arts Movie Associates, with a guy named Bill Connolly. This is something that's lost to time, and it kills me because there's so much information in it. And I keep begging them to like scan the old issues and stuff. Now they're just cranky old men who are just like, fuck it. And but it was the Bible for me. It was just like a Xerox, 15, 20 page thing that came out
fanzine.
Whenever, legit fanzine in the fanzine era. And so they were doing that, and I sort of got, I guess, whatever the back issues were up until this point, and then was a subscriber of it, and that was sort of where you'd learn about the movies and things like that. And subsequently, the other thing was Rick gave me the information for the Jackie Chan fan club in Hong Kong. And I got into the fan club, again, 13 years old. And that was another key thing because what happened was, and Rick and I didn't live far from each other. He was in Connecticut, I was in New York. And subsequently, when I got a little older and, et cetera, I would sneak into Manhattan to go to the movie theaters and stuff like that. That's a little later. But and with him, like I'd meet up with him and he knew people, and that subsequently he leads me to Frank. And so what happens is they had a thing in the Jackie Chan Fan Club magazine. And if anybody has this, I'm sure it's somewhere in my dad's house. But what they would do is they would have like a 2-page thing of people looking for fellow Jackie pen pals around the world. So what you would do is you'd send a letter and a picture of yourself and say, I'm a Jackie fan and I'm looking for pen pals in the United States or whatever, or to trade tapes or whatever, et cetera. And they published me in one of the issues. And so there's a picture. I don't even know what the hell the picture was. But it was, and I don't remember if it had your address in it. Like you couldn't do this now, right? But that led me to a network of pen pals in Japan in particular. And one significant pen pal, a guy named Seaton Chan, who's here, Seaton Chang. And Seaton and I now have known each other 100 years. And Seaton was a crazy, still is, crazy Jackie and Bruce Lee collector. Insane. He probably has the best Bruce and Jackie collection in the world. Like I can't even make it up. Seaton Chang is absolutely nuts. He's sort of another sort of underrated, guy in this space.
I'm wondering, because there was a guy who'd ended up. It was definitely somebody who's based in the States had ended up working with one of the kind of galleries in Hong Kong. So there's a sort of semi-permanent Bruce Lee exhibition there.
No, I don't think it's him. But okay. Seaton, at the time when I met him, on the pen pal thing, lived in Hawaii.
Okay.
Next to a Golden Harvest theater.
Oh, cool.
Okay. So anytime a movie would finish, they'd throw the posters out or get rid of them, all the lobby cards. He'd get them all, and any doubles he had, he gave to me. So I have a whole, somewhere in my dad's house, they're folded. They're not in great shape, but, you don't care, right? Yeah. And all that stuff. And so that led me into the world. And then the Japanese fans were nuts, right? So I actually have a full collection of Jackie Chan Japanese movie programs, I think starting from like Fearless Hyena to like First Strike or something like that. That became my obsession, was to like collect, because the pictures you never saw anywhere, all that stuff. And then the sort of, I remember The Protector came out in the US is like 85. My dad took me to go see it.
Is that 42nd Street?
Well, I'm sorry?
42nd Street, or did that kind of
No, that was in the regular movie theater stuff. In those days, my age, you weren't allowed on 42nd Street. So, but the thing was, in Manhattan in those days, though, and after those days, into the 90s and stuff, there were 3 movie theaters in New York Chinatown. The main one being a place called Music Palace, which is long gone. It's a hotel now. And Music Palace was sort of the Golden Harvest Theater. Then the other 2, there was one directly under a bridge under the subway, which I can't remember the name of. But that was like where all like the Jet Li stuff would play and all this stuff, an occasional Golden Harvest thing. And all that. But Music Palace was sort of the key one. And Rick introduced me to all that stuff. So what happened was, in my later teen years, I was sneaking into Manhattan going to see the theater. But the first movie I saw on the big screen, which is why it's my favorite Jackie movie, even though it's not his best movie, was Armor of God. And I had never been in a Hong Kong theater before, but I was weirdly, I don't know why, in San Francisco on a family trip. And my mother and I guess my dad was there on business. And we're walking by a movie theater, and there was Jackie with the dynamite, right? Like the classic image, the movie. And I was just like, holy shit. You know, I knew about the movie because of Rick and the fanzines and all that stuff. But I was like, it's playing in like 15 minutes. and my mom was like, I don't know what this is, like what we're walking into, etc. But my mom, she was awesome, took me to see it, and my mind exploded. And that was the first Hong Kong movie I'd seen on the big screen. And that led to, you know, sneaking into Manhattan. You know, I remember like anything after that, Jackie-wise, I was sneaking into Manhattan to see. And then, you know, in the early 90s, I went to NYU Film School, which is a 20-minute walk from those theaters. So then it was just easier. Now I was taking my classmates and friends and, you know, like, here's this restaurant, we'll go here. And in those days, especially like when you got into like the late 80s, early 90s, you would literally go to the movie and then walk out the door, and there were like 3 or 4 key bootleg shops that you would get the movie right after, literally filmed off the screen. You know what I mean?
Probably on some enormous VHS on the shoulder camcorder.
Literally, like sometimes handheld, like the camera would move and all that shit. Or if they had been out already, you know, copies of that, right? Like there was like a whole side business. And someday you should talk to Rick. He'll tell you all those little places. And then eventually became like the DVD hubs also, you know, in the later years. And because as each theater started to sort of disappear, you know, like the Chinatown was still worthy of the trip that you would go down to get the DVD of the movie, you know, that you couldn't see anymore. I think like the last of the Jackie movies in New York was like Drunken Master or Rumble in the Bronx, like that era. Like I remember seeing those on the big screen, Drunken Master 2, and those were like the last experiences of you know the movie going experience. And again, those were before they even got their US releases, so they were crazy in terms of like wild audiences. And we'd go at weird times. We'd go like, because in those days the way it would work is I was telling you this on text the other day, is you would call, like you didn't know when the movies were going to come out. Like you knew they were out in Hong Kong, but you didn't know when they would sort of come over here, right? So you would call the theater and just say, Cheng Long. And they go, yes, click, you know, or no, click, you know, and you rush because by the time the weekend's gone, again, my memory's garbage, but I remember wanting to go see something. It was gone, and Yoon Byu's On the Run was there. And I was like, oh, that's even better. I never even heard of this. And then I was like, what the hell's that? And 30 years later, you know, Frank and I are doing the commentary for it. And so that was sort of my experience with that. And then the Japanese pen pals would find you like the great, you know, pristine copy of Heart of the Dragon, you know, that cut. Yeah. So that's not the version I've seen, you know, I had this bootleg of. And so you'd start to learn about the Japanese versions of the movie and all that stuff. And there was so much Jackie merchandise in those days, you know, like even when I go back to Tokyo now, I go to like little film memorabilia shops and sort of flesh out the collection of the movie programs and all that stuff. It took me 30 years to do it.
Jackie was basically the Beatles in Japan. I mean, he was so big. All three of those dudes were. I mean, Yunbeo had a music career in Japan for a little while, and it's hard, I think, for people, particularly if they're coming to Jackie's entire career in one hit, if they're arriving now and their first exposure to him, as for many people, was like Rush Hour. It's really hard to kind of put into perspective.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I'm going to jump way ahead. But the second time I met Jackie, which is in 1994.
What was the first?
87. I'll tell you. That's
we'll do two, then one.
Yeah, I'll do the second one because it ties into the Japanese fan base.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it was in the fan club, and the fan club always had a thing like, "Hey, if you're ever in Hong Kong, come to the office." Right? Cool. They were that fan friendly in those days.
Yeah.
And so I went to Hong Kong. I had just finished college, and I went with my family and all that stuff. And I have this beautiful Armor of God book that they released to go with the movie. And Operation Condor. Sorry, the Operation Condor book. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful photo book that I think only they put it out through the fan club. It's super rare, whatever the hell it is. Right now, it's framed somewhere in my house. And I brought it to Hong Kong with me. Like, if I'm going to meet him, I'm going to ask him to sign it. And now I'd already met him 7 years before in New York. That's the other story. And so I go to the office. So we land. I'll just do the whole fucking story.
Go for it.
So we land in Hong Kong. We go to the hotel. We're jet lagged, and my mom and dad are like, "Listen, don't be upset if he's not in town. You've already met him. You finally made it to Hong Kong. We're going to Hong Kong, Beijing, Tokyo on a family trip. You've never been to Asia. This has been your dream since you were 5 years old. Like, don't sweat it if Jackie's not there." And literally, my dad opens the newspaper. I'm not making this up. That they give you at the hotel, the English language paper. And on the front page is Jackie and Stallone, the opening of Planet Hollywood in Hong Kong. And I went, bingo, he's here. Yeah. And I don't, like I said, never been there. I don't know my way around, all this stuff. But somehow I get in a cab, show them the address, and they bring me, it was the building. It was like the house, the giant house office he had in that era. Mm-hmm. Rick knows all that stuff. Frank knows all that stuff. And went to the office, and it's a very like heavily pregnant receptionist, sort of like, okay, here's another American who's shown up, and I'm here to see Jackie. Basically, you just have I'm here to meet him. Like, he's not here right now, but all this stuff. And then some guy comes out, and he's like the representative of the fan club, and he's like, gives you a cup of tea, and he sits you down, and he gives you tons of magazines and pictures and things like that. And he's really sweet, and he speaks perfect English. And he says, "Listen, he's not here. His assistant's not here yet, so we don't know his schedule, right?" Mm-hmm. And I went, "Oh, okay, okay, no problem." And again, I'm doing this out of sequence, but so I leave, and he gives me his number. He said, "Call back later." He gives me a business card. I still have it somewhere. And a couple of hours, I'm sort of moping around, like, "Oh man, I hope," getting anxious. And my mom just goes, just call. And it's payphones. We don't have a cell phone yet, in Hong Kong. And I go, he just got here. And I'm like, boom, run, raining, covered in, I'm soaked, all that stuff. And I get to the thing, and they greet me, and they go, his reception area, just sit here. It's beautiful reception area with Jackie stuff all over the walls. Mm-hmm. And also there is a young woman, a young Japanese woman, and her grandmother, right, have come to Japan from Japan to see Jackie, right? And what I later found out was he's there in the office for script meetings for Rumble in the Bronx, what eventually becomes Rumble in the Bronx, okay? And so what happens is I'm like fidgeting at the, and then two guys come down, and I recognize them as the two guys from the stunt team. And they're like, "Hey, do you want to come watch soccer with us, football?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I'm sitting in between these two stunt guys. And I'm like, "Hey, didn't you do this in this movie?" And he goes, "Yeah." And they're like so excited. They get recognized, all this stuff, right? And I go, "Didn't you do this? Like, didn't that hurt?" And he's got like a permanent limp. Right? So I'm just sitting with I have a picture of these guys somewhere. And Jackie comes down, and then someone calls him, and he goes back up for another like half hour, right? And then I'm still chatting with these guys. They love the attention, all this stuff. And subsequently, Jackie comes down, and he goes right by me, goes right to the Japanese girl and her grandmother. And this is the reason why I brought this story up with the Japanese thing is the grandmother's there to see him, not the granddaughter. The grandmother is the fan. And she's like trying to keep it together. And he's speaking to them in Japanese, like he's really charming, all this stuff. And these women are losing their minds. Like even the granddaughter's sort of like swooning over him, all that stuff. And, he signs the thing, sends him on the way, comes to me, and I go, we met before. And he goes, New York Film Festival. He remembers the first time, and I had brought the picture from the first time. And now everybody's coming down like to get him back to whatever meeting it is, right? Yeah. And now there's like 10 people like all just circling around the strange kid from America who's all this stuff. And he's literally remembering details of that conversation, which I'll tell later. And he goes, what have you been doing since I saw you? Right. So we take a bunch of pictures. He signs that the Operation Condor book, all that stuff, gives me a bunch of stuff. I had gone to Planet Hollywood before I went there. So he's asking me like, how is it? And I was like, Planet Hollywood. And he goes, what have you been doing since? I said, I went to film school. And he lit up. He goes, sit. And he sat me in the reception area, just sits at the table, sends everybody away. And for 25 minutes, asks me nothing but questions about film school. What cameras did you use? What blah, 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 like, what do they teach you? What do they use? I want to do that kind of thing here. Educate, the Chinese on how to make movies. And the funny thing is, I had done student films adaptations of City Hunter because I loved the manga, and it was around the same time he was doing the movie, so I thought it was cool. Like I said, I made a like a student movie based on City. He goes, I made City Hunter. I go, of course I know you made City Hunter. We talked about that for a little bit, and then I said, what are you working on now? And he goes, I'm doing something, that's because he knew I was from New York, so he was like, something it's going to be like based in New York. I was like, oh, cool. And who's gonna, you're gonna direct it? He goes, no, the guy who did Super Cop. Stanley. And he goes, how do you know that? Like, how do you know all this? Like, they were always, every time I've met them, they're always fascinated that all this stuff about them, right? And like, I knew the director. And then the game was, so it had to be they were making Rumble, but then Drunken Master had just come out. So Drunken Master 2 is before Rumble?
Yeah.
Okay.
Drunken Master 2 94 and I think 96.
The most recent movie is Drunken Master 2.
Yeah.
And if you remember, he fired the director off the movie.
Yeah.
Right? Which is cool. So I said, I don't know. I said, I like the scenes you directed. I can tell the difference. And he goes, oh, really? And he starts, he goes, all right, we're going to play a game. And his English, by the way, his conversational English is much better than it ever lets on. Right?
Yeah.
He goes, who directed the scene under the train? I said, he did. Who directed this? I said, you did. He says, you're right. And then he goes, you should come back tomorrow. I said, really? I go, you going to be here? He goes, no, but you can come back anytime, And then he went on his way. And that was the and by the way, that's the first day of the trip. So my parents after that were just like, I was like, oh, we can do whatever you want now, And but that was the second time. But the only reason I bring that back is like the Japanese fandom was genuine. And even when I spent a lot of time in Tokyo working on the Transformers and Tekken stuff in the last 5 years, I've been there, dozens of times, and you can find all the old stuff. This generation doesn't really know who he is, so it's sort of like an old people thing now. Like when the Jackie movie comes out, but like when 1911 came out, it was his 100th movie. They were doing like big celebrations and retrospectives. I have these cool like magazines and things that they were doing with like the history of Jackie, the first 100 movies, and they were, they did like video re-releases and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm rambling on, but you get the idea.
No, it's amazing. I think the Japanese particularly, it's fascinating how when they preserve stuff so well in terms of when you see the shops. Yeah, I'm desperate to go to Japan. I haven't managed to kind of make it.
It's the greatest. It's the absolute great. I'll tell you my greatest sort of thing, and you and I touched on this when we were talking, is what's fascinating about those Japanese movie programs that I was mentioning earlier is when you talk about them preserving everything, the sort of the weird anomaly thing. And I helped Frank with this when he was doing Armor of God, which, as I mentioned, is my favorite. I'm hoping somebody does a 4K thing and asks us to do it. What's weird about the Armor of God movie program in Japan is it has stills from the pre-accident Eric Sang version.
The different haircut.
Yeah. So it's like Jackie at a cafe with the short hair, with the Count, and her Lola Forner, and you know, Alan Tam, and like them getting on a plane and her giving Jackie the finger. Like there's these weird stills that, like, you know, for years have been sort of like, you know, forensically studied. Like, what is this? And, you know, like, what more is there? Is there more footage? You know, like, but they didn't care. Like, I'll tell you, I'm going to jump to the next story is, thanks to Frank and Rick, I met Sammo Hung at the New York Film Festival. And it's on my Facebook somewhere, the picture of me, Rick, Sammo, and my nephew, who's now 25, but he was little then. Eastern Condors is his favorite movie. We watch it every Christmas. Anyway,
good taste.
So they were showing Eastern Condors at the New York Film Festival. This is 10, 12 years ago. And they were doing a Sammo tribute, so that he came and give him an award and all that stuff. And, you know, again, your audience will understand exactly what I'm saying, is the trailer for Eastern Condors has barely anything to do with the actual movie, right? It's all the footage of them playing basketball, the prison stuff, all that crap. So you know, Frank and Rick said, you can ask Sammo a question, right? I thought, this is the only question I'm ever going to ask Sammo is, what was that? Like, where's all that footage? Like, what did you do? And he basically explained in pretty good English also that it was all filler to establish those characters in the first act. And he felt the movie was too slow with it. So I said, he goes, so I cut it and I used some of it for the introductions of the characters, like, you know, cut really quickly and all stuff. So he goes, I used some of it. I said, well, you know, where are the reels of the? He goes, oh, I threw them out. I said, like, threw them out like in the storage? He goes, no, in the garbage. You know, like they didn't understand then. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and so to go back to the Armored God thing, I was always curious if, like, any of that footage, like we've been chatting nonstop about Game of Death the last, you know, month, watching your video, and, you know, with this box set coming out, well, now out, you know, how much footage, but they didn't care. They didn't, you know, like they just threw that shit out, like, nah, no problem. And I was just like, you know, like you feel the pain in your heart. Like, I would kill to see that footage, you know, like, and only now do people appreciate it. Like, I just literally went a month ago to the Academy Museum, which luckily I live 5 minutes from and can walk to.
We should say you're now in LA.
I'm in Los Angeles, yeah. So the Academy of, like, the guys who give the Oscars and all that stuff literally did a Sammo program of like 15 movies. Yeah. So I just walked 5 minutes ago to the Academy Museum to watch Eastern Condors in 35 millimeter on the big screen. That's insane. And then 2 days later, I went to the New Beverly, which is Quentin Tarantino's theater, and I watched a double feature of 35 millimeter prints of Rumble in the Bronx and First Strike, which, by the way, were pristine prints. And I found out they're Warner Brothers prints. So the fact that they haven't put those out on, like, Bluray is insane.
It's staggering.
Because
Rumble going through the BBFC certification just now, but they're not. I don't think they're doing the Hong Kong version of it.
They literally have a Hong Kong print of it.
Yeah,
it's insane. It was incredible, and seeing it with, you know, now being the old man, seeing with the audience of people who've never seen either not seen these movies before, or seeing them for the first time on the big screen. The joy of being an audience with these people, like, you know, the contrast of Eastern Condors and Rumble in the Bronx in the same way that if you told me 30 years ago, like, yeah, you're going to go walk down the block to a museum to watch these movies. You know, I was still thinking I'd probably have to keep the VHS bootlegs of these things. You know what I mean? Like, who's going to care about these things other than, you know, me and these 3 or 4 people that I know? It's wild.
We're incredibly spoiled at the moment.
Oh, I love it.
And me too, but it's crazy seeing how quickly people have become quite entitled. So go back and tell me the first time you met Jackie.
Well, the first time was, I was really lucky in that in 1987, so I was 12 or 13, they were showing Police Story at the New York Film Festival. And this was very controversial at the time. Right, you can find the articles. Like, the program director actually was fired after this, the 1987 New York Film Festival, because they were showing a Chopsaki movie. Right, they weren't considered art yet, and I was all excited. You know, like, again, this is actually, now I sort of take it. This is probably the same year I saw Armor of God on the big screen, like that same like year and a half, whether it happens before or after, I don't remember. So
it's hard. It's hard for us because I think we can go back and see when the movies were made, but that doesn't always correlate to when we got to see them.
And so many were made at the same time, and you know, like every time Frank and I do a thing, I always like have to go through like, when did this come out before this one? Like there's a blur of that whole era. So anyway, find out he's going to introduce the movie. And I was like, holy shit, right? And so 3 of my buddies, you know, same age as me, and my parents drove us in. But earlier that day, he had been on Regis Philbin. And you have the picture of this. I emailed it to you. And Jackie was wearing beige pants, a black blazer, and a white shirt. And I said, I'm going to wear the same thing, right, to go to the thing. So the picture, we're in the same outfit. You'll see. And what happens is, you know, this is another thing that's sort of lost to time, is this is something I should have mentioned, which was part of the whole education, was there used to be a Hong Kong entertainment publication called Cinemart. And Cinemart was a monthly magazine, very thick, where the first like 10, 15 pages were full color, then the rest were black and white articles, interviews, etc. But it covered the entire Hong Kong motion picture industry. So production stills, etc. That's how you learned a lot about, and none of it was in English. But that was the other thing you would do when you walk out of the theater, you buy the bootleg of the movie, then you go to the bookstore. There was one bookstore on East Broadway that you would buy this month's issue of Cinemart, and every star and starlet was on the cover. Jackie was on it all the time. But you'd also see, this is the movie they're currently making, right? And pictures, like a lot of that stuff ends up in the booklets now with the, you know, the re-releases and stuff. So I had an issue of Cinemart with Jackie on the cover, and I brought it with me. And we got to the theater early, and in those days, it's not assigned seats, you know. So my buddies sort of went in to get a good seat, and I started wandering around Alice Tully Hall at Lincoln Center. That's where it was happening. And I just sort of went up an escalator to La Fleur. And again, I swear on my mother's grave, I'm not making any of this up. He's literally at a water fountain by himself. And I went, Jackie? And he was like, he looked at me like I was an alien. And he said, you know, I said, I'm your fan. I came to see this. And he was like, what? Come here. Like, so it turns out he was at the water fountain right outside the green room. So in the green room's Willie, his manager, David Chan, who was his producer, a guy named Tom Gray, who was Golden Harvest's U.S. guy, who actually plays into this My Life Story a little later on also, and a couple of assistants. And they're in this green room. And he just sort of brings me in. You know, says something in Chinese, says, you know, have a seat. They give me a drink. And he sits next to me. But they all start asking me questions. Like, how do you know who Jackie is? What movies do you see? And, you know, like, again, 87. So what movies are being made, etc. But I had seen, they were shocked I had seen Project A. They were shocked I knew these movies. And he's signing the book for me. And we took a bunch of pictures. I even have a picture of Willie and David Chan. Like, like they didn't understand. I was just like, you know, with the old school camera, just like you don't understand, like, all this stuff, right? And I said, you know, I'm your number one American fan. And he goes, no, you're my number one fan everywhere. And he gave me a big hug. And he said something to them, and they said, give us your address, right? And I have the picture of this. I just sent it to Frank and Will Gish recently. Is the Tom Gray, the Golden Harvest LA guy, took my address, and a couple weeks later, a tube full of Jackie English language movie posters that they did for international sales showed up with a really nice letter saying, like, you know, like, it was great to meet a real Jackie fan. Please enjoy these posters and all this. I still have them. And so I, you know, again, Jackie and I barely said a word. He literally sat right next to me, just looking at me like I was an alien, you know, like while they were asking all the questions. And sometimes they translate for him, and he'd laugh and slap you on the back kind of thing, like, you know, say something about a stunt, you know, like, I loved when you did this, and, you know, all that stuff. But again, it was weird. Like usually you meet your hero and you ask them questions, and it was the complete
opposite,
right?
Both times, by the sound of things.
And so, what happened was, I went back, sat with my friends, and said, "Look, I met him." And I was like, "They talked to me," and blah blah. They were like, "Yeah, whatever." Like you got his autograph, cool. Jackie comes out to introduce the movie. We're in the second row. He goes like this and waves, and my friends all go, "Oh shit!" Like, and we have a picture. I have pictures of all this stuff somewhere, and that was the first time. That was the first time. So the funny thing is, the second time he remembered that.
Yeah.
Fast forward, 2014. I don't think I lived here yet. 2013 or 14. It was the year I moved here, but I was here in LA, and I went back, and one of my agents called me and said, "Hey, they're doing a Jackie tribute at the Academy. They're going to show Super Cop on 35 millimeter. He's coming. Like, you should come." And I literally turned back and flew. Like, my wife surprised me with a plane ticket. I went back. And obviously 2013, 14, this is easy to document this more. And I went, and I got there early to the reception, and they had the Academy Museum, not far from where I live. Not that museum. This was a different Academy venue kind of thing before the museum. So this is like 10 years ago. And so what happened was they had all his posters and stills, and they did like a red carpet, and he came, and he does the red carpet, and I'm like taking pictures, from far, like at a table, having a glass of wine, just sort of taking pictures. Like, it's cool to be in the same room with him. I met him a bunch of times, all this stuff, right? All this stuff. And then the agent shows up, and he says to me, "Yeah, come on, let's go upstairs to the the reception area and have a drink before the movie starts." I said, "Great." And he takes me up to this thing, and it turns out it's an ambush to put me back with Jackie after all this time, right? So what happens is the guy who's doing the Q&A, a guy named Jeff Boucher, comes out of a room, looks at me, and goes, "Why am I doing the Q&A while FJ's here? FJ should be doing the Q&A." And it laugh. And Jackie comes out, and he goes, and I had the pictures in the phone now, as opposed to running around with the phone. And the funny thing is, he goes, "I remember 1987, but I don't remember 1994. He goes, "I don't remember you coming to the office." He goes, "But I remember you in New York." And he goes, "But I'm old, and I got hit in the head a lot since." And everybody laughs and all that stuff. And he goes, "I want to take another picture." So he makes us go to the roof of the building, and he literally sets up the shot. When I say set up a shot, he's like, "The sun is here. We'll stand here." Again, I emailed this to you, so you can put this somewhere if you want.
Yeah, put this up while you're speaking.
And he we take a picture, and he goes, "Let's do it again in 30 years. I said, "Absolutely." And at that point, he let me call him Daigo. I said, "Daigo," and he said, "Okay." And that was the third time. So that's my life with
JC.
Yeah,
that's so cool, man. And I think
it's so lucky, so lucky. My
very,
poor wife, literally, when she moved into New York, had to wake up every day for years to a Drunken Master 2 movie poster and all those pictures and the the Operation Condor signed book, and also a Stephen Chow autograph thing. That's Rick's fault. Rick introduced me to Stephen Chow one year, and which was very brief. He came to Comic-Con, and it was never announced. And Rick's like, "Do you want to meet Stephen Chow?" I was like, "What, are you kidding me?" And he signed a Shaolin Soccer, literally like a Xerox of like an ad for it or something like that. But
does that be around the time of Kung Fu Hustle coming up?
No. It was Shaolin Soccer, and then the second. So Rick interviewed Stephen Chow for the Kung Fu Hustle DVD at the time, and I had a book, a Kung Fu Hustle book. How I get these things, I don't know. And eBay was my friend at a certain point to catch up on all the shit I missed in my childhood. So I had a Kung Fu Hustle like art book or a making of book or something. It was all in Chinese, and I have that signed somewhere. So I got to meet all the sort of key guys that I loved, as a kid. But yeah, it's just been such a big part of my life.
And we should also mention to those that don't know, because separate to being a fan, which you so clearly are, you've also been heavily involved in the cinema industry, the cinema and TV industry, for almost your whole professional life.
I got lucky. I went to film school, like I mentioned, and I got a job right out of college from the executive producers of the Batman movies, a guy named Michael Uslan and his partner Ben Melnick, who since passed away. He's the smartest man I ever met. He was 102 years old. And I grew up a DC Comics fanatic. So they hired me right out of film school, and I worked for them for years. And a big chunk of those years were when like the post George Clooney stuff. And then I was there around the time they started to do the Nolans. I was there for the first 2 Nolans. Well, and when I say I was there, let me be clear. Like I'm like the junior guy, like eavesdropping through the walls and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Uslan was like, kind of cut him and he bleeds Batman. I mean, he wrote the book. Didn't he write the book, the boy who...
He's written 2 books. I'm in both of them, supposedly. But yeah, it was... You know, Michael was a pioneer of the comic book movie in that when I started working for Michael, you know, comics were here, entertainment was here, and he was the guy in the middle sort of bridging the gap. And that gap sort of closed as movies became more and more popular. So the first movie I ever worked on, sort of soup to nuts, under him was a movie called Constantine with Keanu Reeves, which was a blast. There's a deleted scene. You'll see me running around with homeless people in downtown LA. But that was the first movie for me to see the process of selling the movie, developing the movie, casting the movie, putting the movie together, making it, marketing, all that stuff. And then I did a movie. The first movie I produced, was a co-producer on, was Will Eisner's The Spirit, which Frank Miller wrote and directed. Exactly. I don't even have that version. And you know, which didn't do well, but the experience, again, being a DC Comics fan, and in the particular era when Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and V for Vendetta, all that stuff comes out when you're a teenager, like it's almost like you grew up with it. You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to like now there's just seminal classics that are should be part of anybody's comic education. They were new to me then, right? And I was a Frank Miller fanatic. And when we were doing The Spirit, Frank and I were the only 2 people involved with the production who lived in New York. He was only a subway stop away from me. So anytime he needed something, et cetera, I'd end up going up there, bring stuff, and old comics or something, and having a ball with him. You know, like my best memories of the movie, we made the movie in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where there's not a lot going on. And I remember just sitting in a Wendy's talking about Legion of Superheroes with him. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And we're still pals. And, you know, I see him when he's here. We'll get lunch and things like that. But yeah, he's one of my great idols.
Frank's a genius. Like by all accounts, I think kind of there's great comic book writers and there's great comic book artists, and you can count on one hand the ones that are able to master both. And I think Frank absolutely was able to. And
his brain thinks in ways that you can't imagine. Like the things that come out of his mouth are just like, you know, like, how did you think of that and all that stuff? Like, you know. We get in arguments over Batman and Robin and stuff like that, and you know, just his perspective on it and desire to push it forward, and you know, he's got the gruff, you know, demeanor, but you know, like when you get to know him and you just want to talk, he just wants to talk comic books. He's like a little kid, you know, like my nephew was really little, and I brought him to the office one day, and he literally had my nephew running around Leonidas's helmet and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, and Hartigan's badge and all this shit. Like he's really like, what I like about Frank is, which people don't entirely get, is he's retained an understanding and connection to what made him love all that stuff in the first place, and how to push it. You know, how to. And has such an amazing respect of everybody who came before him, like the Neil Adams of the world and the Jack Kirby's of the world. And people don't see through that because they hold him to the standard of what he did versus where it came from. You know, like Sin City, the reason he did The Spirit was the influence for Sin City. You know, he originally passed on the movie and then literally said, I can't let anybody else do it. You know, so again, regardless of the movie,
I love that movie. I think in some ways it's more cohesive and it's worked slightly more effectively than Sin City 2, which I kind of thought.
I think technically it's better than Sin City 2.
Yeah, because
Sin City 2 they're trying to do Unreal Engine stuff and all that crap. And
you guys had Bill Pope. You had like Bill Pope, the most incredible cinematographer.
The interesting thing is putting Bill Pope and Frank together. because I think Bill Pope really vibed off somebody who could draw what he wanted versus a director trying to explain it. Like they connected on such a cool artistic level. You know what I mean? Like, and I think Frank had so much trust in Bill to let him sort of play with the toys, you know, technically and frame things like the way they wanted to and things like that. And I think people, you know, it was a good experience. That was a really good collaboration to see those two together. Like, I haven't thought about this in ages, but they genuinely vibed off each other in a really positive way.
It shows. It's beautiful. Because as much as I like Robert Rodriguez, I mean, kind of coming from a filmmaking background myself as well, I loved the kind of the guerrilla ethos and aspect to his stuff. But there's a sheen and a slickness and a competence in the cinematography of The Spirit that I don't think Rodriguez is that interested in pushing that extra mile to get to. He's kind of more, let's just go fast, go hard, and get what we need as quick as we can. Whereas Bill Pope's a certifiable master. I mean, I think it's very hard for Bill Pope to do shots that don't look beautiful. I mean, kind of go back to the Wachowskis' early movie Bound, and it's incredibly rich. And obviously, he did The Matrix, but I think he kind of gets restless quite quick. That's kind of why you could tell as those Matrix movies went on, he got less and less enthusiastic as CG was taking over more and more, and he was getting less to do. But I think it's not surprising that he was sort of re-energized by working on Scott Pilgrim. I think he did Scott Pilgrim for Edgar Wright, and that's another amazing, very comic booky in terms of the truest sense of comic book movie. I'm not talking about what Marvel and Disney do, but going back to the thing that we loved when we were looking at the panels of a comic book. And I think The Spirit celebrates that so much. And it's so much fun seeing Samuel L. Jackson having that much fun, because that goes
he had a ball in that movie. And and he's such a pro. You know what I mean? Like I always liked him, but when we did that movie, you see why everybody hires him and why he always works. Because what Sam Jackson does is, right, he walks in, he'll give you 3 takes. He'll give you the first take, then he'll give you the take with the director's notes, and then he'll riff a 3rd take. And he'll remember, he never forgets a line, never forgets a cue, never forgets anything. And utmost professional. The only thing you have to do when you hire Sam Jackson for the movie is make sure there's a PGA level golf course nearby, because that's his obsession. So as long as he can go play golf, he's happy. But and again, another like Bill Pope, a total professional that shows up early, leaves late, learns every line, enjoys the process, enjoys the collaboration, you know, and really, like that was the first time seeing, like, you know, Keanu was like that too on Constantine. Keanu was the consummate professional. Like, you know, he just, there's certain people like that. You always hear horror stories in the business, but then there's also good guys like that.
He's a good dude. I'm really glad that they're making a second one of those, right? We're seeing Constantine 2.
I hope so. I don't know what's going on with it, but I mean, I know they were putting it together. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm long out of the loop.
And I know that the kind of some of the kind of the real the kind of the diehards of the Constantine comics kind of felt that guy who did some of the TV shows was maybe aesthetically closer to looking like the kind of Matt. I can't remember the guy's surname. Yeah. But I actually really enjoyed Keanu's take on it. I think the world that they populated, the other characters around him, particularly Tilda Swinton's character, she was doing kind of Gabriel, I think, wasn't she?
Well, I remember when they cast her, and you know, like it was just like, oh, that's brilliant, because they had been looking at men to play that role, the Angel Gabriel, right?
Yeah.
And then I, again, being the junior guy on these things, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, Tilda Swinton is like, wait, that's a woman. No, it's going to be like very androgynous and cool and rock and roll and you know, and at the same time they had been talking to Peter Stormare to play the devil.
Yeah.
And what that did was it gave you a sense of the tone of like, this is what you're going for. This is like, all of a sudden it went from being a movie to being really cool. Like, hey, this is really cool. Like, you know, and not for the sake of being cool. Like, this is smart, subversive thinking that's actually going to make the movie better versus stunt casting.
Yeah. It really did. I was kind of also glad that even like John Wick 4 gave a wee nod of the hat to it with the kind of the dragon's breath, that shotgun blast and stuff. It's kind of cool to see that coming back. But man, yeah, wow, both movies that I really, really enjoy. And then you kind of built on all of that and moved into writing yourself and showrunning and producing.
I fell into animation in the last 6-7 years. I got lucky.
Well, I think by the sound of it, through a lifelong love of anime.
Yeah, I'm a big anime manga fanatic. So this sort of goes in sync with the Hong Kong stuff also. In fact, it predates it a little bit because I'm of a certain age, as you understand, that when anime manga first hit the US in the late 70s and early 80s, it was mind-blowing. Gatchaman and Yamato and Macross before it was Robotech and all that stuff. And again, that was the advantage of living in New York. We had Japanese bookstores, so I could buy the art books and the manga and all that. So they were in Japanese. I just loved it. And then again, that was the double benefit of having pen pals in Japan, is getting those tapes too. And it all sort of interconnected in a way. And I had worked a lot in Japan, so I sort of knew the culture, the business, and all that stuff. And like I said, I sort of fell into animation, which is too long a story to get into. But I've had a wonderful experience producing anime. The last couple of years, I did 6 seasons of 2 different Transformers shows. The second one is the one I sort of show ran and built from the beginning, and then I did a season of Tekken, which both are on Netflix, and which was a difficult project because video game people really can be difficult. I'm being nice about it, as opposed to toy people who just want their toys on screen and let you do whatever you want. But it made me learn to love the medium even more now, sort of seeing how it's the sausage is made, as they say. But I just wrote my first pilot. Like I wrote on these shows, but I never written a pilot or all that stuff that I'm doing for a streamer now. That I'm digging deeper into that world, mostly to have another excuse to go to Tokyo. But it's a great medium. It's a lot of fun, and that was the advantage of working for Michael and Ben for all those years, was understanding how franchises work, or how these big companies look at them and handle them, and what we now call IP. And that was one of the reasons I was able to get the Transformers gig and the Tekken gig, is that sort of background of understanding what these people want from franchises, but also how to make them sort of fan facing, and making them exciting to an audience, while also servicing those needs of selling toys and video games and things like that without making them commercials.
But I need to dive more into your your work on Transformers as a viewer, because there's just so much stuff to kind of watch that we haven't had Netflix for the longest time, so I've only seen fleeting glimpses of it, but everything that I've seen has been very heartwarming, in the sense that it reminds me of how in my mind Transformers should look.
That was the idea. So when we did the first one was a digital series, the second series, War for Cybertron, the one on Netflix, which we did 3 seasons of, was designed to be a love letter to G1, and created to appeal to the fan who didn't get what they wanted out of the Bay movies, etc.
And the Bay stuff is technically maybe kind of quite competent, but I find it really difficult to follow and watch.
Well, it's interesting now. It's sort of learning this, working with Hasbro on these things. There's literally, now those movies have been around, 10, 15 years, however long it is. And my college roommate wrote 3 of those movies, and paid for my bachelor party and a lot of meals. But what's interesting is, what people don't realize is now there's an entire generation of fans raised on that.
Yeah.
On the Bay stuff. It's Transformers is a wildly fascinating franchise, in that there's so many iterations of it. And people are very territorial about whatever their iteration of it. It's not, it's weird. The only comp I can come up with is Batman, except everybody loves Batman. You know what I mean? Like you love every version of it. Like, what I learned with Transformers, and hopefully not a lot of Transformers fans watch this, is they hate whatever's new.
Yeah.
Right? and then it comes out, and then when the next thing comes out, they go, it's not as good as the last one. Then they suddenly like your stuff. We're going through that now on our show, which was like even though our show is literally the best rated Transformer show ever, more than the movies on Rotten Tomatoes, all that stuff. The fan base, I still get messages every day like, "Why'd you do this? Well, how dare you?" and all this, take liberties and.
So what's the holy grail for them? That the first original animated movie?
Well, it depends because the guys our age, which are stuck on that. But like I said, there's so many iterations of it, you can't please all of them. So the idea when we did War for Cybertron is a love letter to G1, but it was enough where if you had never seen Transformers before, you could start here.
Okay.
And go, I'm going to look at these other things and find something else you like. But it's fascinating. So I'm sure there's a cult of fans who love our show, or that'll grow up with our show because the toys sold really well, in conjunction with the show and all that stuff. And, that's a really interesting thing is sort of how to create something that serves a brand. Like I said, that doesn't end up being a commercial, like something that can stand on its own. And that was really important to us. And Hasbro were great. It was a great experience, whereas like when we did Tekken, Bandai Namco, the video game people, very, very difficult because I think they're so protective of their IP, whereas like I think because Hasbro's been through these iterations of so many different iterations of Transformers that they sit there and go, okay, this is a new one. And, me trying to think like a fan because I was a fan of that era in particular. And, wanted it done as anime, wanted it done in Japan, and, the Japanese studio, which we did. And, I was sitting there going to Hasbro, give me the 3D models of all your toys and I'll just replicate them in the show, have the studio do that, which saves time, money. But I also thought from the fan base, they sit there and go, it's toy accurate because, like what I wanted was a little kid to see the show and go, I want that guy and be able to buy that toy and
have it be the same.
But then you got guys my age and older than me going, well, the toy pegs are still in the back of the hole. And, in this shot, it's just like, you can't win. Like, I'm not going to sit there and fill that out. It's like this constant.
It's very weird, man.
Yeah.
I think I've heard you speak about this a little bit because you did a couple of really good episodes of the Rebel
Force Radio.
Force Radio.
My other love is Star Wars.
And I've kind of, I think you described in the course of speaking about fandom in kind of one of the episodes you were on, you kind of described my perspective on Star Wars to a T, which was when the prequels came out, that was the point that I semi-checked out in terms of, I'm still one of those kind of dudes that kind of really just thinks there's 3 Star Wars movies and it kind of ended at Return of the Jedi. And so when Lucas did the prequels, I was kind of like, and now watching all the kids, like you say, that have kind of grown up with that as their sort of first big exposure to the franchise, they love those movies. They love Jar Jar. They love all the stuff that old men like me were like, what is this? And it's really weird how things kind of shift and evolve. And I think
it's a generational thing now because the problem is you and I come from basically like one of the first generations of entertainment fandom, right? Like in terms of filmed entertainment and things like that.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain perception of, and I try to apply this when we do like Transformers or something like that, is I try to look at everything as a fan myself of these things, like how do we appeal to somebody, not necessarily to me, but somebody who thinks like that, right? While making it open. So my nephew, who I mention often, who's now 25, his movie-going experience was exactly that, was the prequels, right? So to him, where you sit there and go, there's 3 movies and that's it. He sits there and goes, there's 6 movies and that's it.
Yeah.
Right? And the weird thing is, and by the way, when it comes specifically to Star Wars, I have blinders. I cannot be an objective viewer. I can sit there and watch the worst Star Wars media and take out what I need from I learned this about the larger universe. I learned how Obi-Wan and Anakin met. Like the movie's okay, they get better as they go. I think the prequels. So I'll never hate anything Star Wars. So the fascinating thing was the big example is last year that sort of proves the point that led to those podcasts you were listening to was when Obi-Wan Kenobi came out, which again is a very sort of shaky series, not the greatest series. But when they brought back Anakin in the flashbacks with Obi-Wan Kenobi, fan base went crazy because then you had prequel nostalgia.
Yeah,
you had that. That was the first time those kids who grew up with it saw their heroes again for the first time in a context. And now the prequels aren't so bad after all because we hate the sequels. So now they're going to go make a Rey movie in a couple of years, and then you're going to have the last 10 years of kids who grew up with that, who Rey, Finn, and Poe are their Star Wars. That's what people don't realize. And again, I won't argue with anybody. Like the Indiana Jones movie, like I liked it, right?
The new one, Dial of Destiny.
Yeah, the new one. I have a lot of friends who don't like it, right? Why did it make it? Why is it unnecessary? Well, didn't insult the property, closed out his story, etc. I'll take what I can get, right? But again, this just applies to like, for some reason, just the Lucasfilm stuff. Like there's other stuff like Marvel, I'm checked out. DC, I'm checked out. Like things like that. But I don't hate on anything. Like I'm not going to sit there and be like, certain things. But I'm never going to go on a podcast and sort of, crap on something because a lot of people put a lot of work into these things. And that was the thing I learned on Transformers was like you're sitting there like I feel protective of all the writers, I feel protective of all the actors, I feel protective of all the crew, all that stuff. And like you're sitting there going, the animation, the frame rate, it's like you're not there. You know what I mean? Like you don't know. Like, oh, they did this because of this. Like, no, it's not. Like sometimes I'll pop on a Twitter thing and go, no or yes and all this stuff. And then people are like, wait a minute, aren't you that guy? Yeah, I'm that guy. And so, when it comes to those fandom things, it's like, look, I don't like the last, 15 years of Jackie movies, right? Like I just watched Ride On. I don't think I've seen a couple of but I don't sit there and hate on him. You know what I mean? Like I don't sit there and go, well, forget that and all that stuff. It's just, it's a different era. It's a different, like, I'm just glad the guy's healthy and working. You know what I mean? Like he gave me the joy and I can go enjoy that stuff and enjoy the things we're talking about, which is sort of a new generation of fans being able to see stuff that we struggled to, or had to sort of really be, smart and how to find them and, dig them up. And that was half the fun in a pre-eBay world. Now, when you're my age, eBay is great. It's like, oh, remember that movie? I'll go find the program for that or whatever. I don't have to go through searching, people and all that stuff. It's like,
it's weird. It does give rise to like a weird kind of entitlement. And also I think YouTube, which we're on just now, I think kind of maybe slightly compounds the problem because there's a whole bunch of channels out there that are making with infinitely larger viewerships than I have who make good money out of basically just shitting on stuff. And I kind of get the sense that they're at their happiest when something doesn't quite hit the mark.
Oh, yeah. So I went through that on Transformers. And there was a couple of funny ones where it was like, they'd be doing press, like, hey, you're going to do these interviews for these fan channels. Yeah. And I would say, put me on these other two, right? Or 2 or 3, like the ones that exactly what you said, the ones that shit on everything, right? And I watched them in advance and literally like would get on with them and sort of go, well, you said this, but it was really this. Like you didn't pay attention. Like call them out. And there was like one kid who like was like a guy who won't even show his face on his channel. It's like a cartoon character. And when we do the making of book, we did a bunch of press for it. And I said, put me on with that kid. And the kid, like, he was so, quote unquote, starstruck that he'd been asked by Hasbro. Like, he thought it legitimized him. And then literally it was just him and I fighting for an hour. And then the funny thing is, then he sort of creatively edited it to make, and like created graphics of us fighting and stuff like that. And I literally went on the YouTube channel and go, you edited this. Like, I called him out on all his bullshit, right? And he was like, well, you come back. I got big hits for us. No, I'm not coming back. Is that what I have to say? And, it's like, channels like yours or Will, at Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society, that I have plenty of time for. Like, those are the ones I watch, right? Like you guys, like I just watched, what's his face? Yeah, Brandon on. And, like I watched that 2.5 hours, I was listening to it in the car. You know what I mean? Like, just like, oh, I'm learning about the box set. I'm learning about all the technical stuff that Frank never tells me about. You know what I mean? Like the film school nerd in me starts to come out. It's like, I don't have time to be negative. You know what I mean? Like I don't have time to there are times. Look, I'm happy to have a creative conversation with somebody. Oh, you know what they should have done in Indiana Jones is this. This would have been a better solution for it. But I'm not going to sit there and be like, fuck them. You know what I mean? Like there's no point. There's no point. Like, and
otherwise, why are you into that thing? Like, if it's not bringing you joy, without sounding too Marie Kondo about it, but if you're not getting joy from that thing that you're supposedly a fan of, why bother, man? Because there's a million other things out there that hopefully some of those other things would give you a little bit more joy.
Well,
but I think
what people want is, when we love something, you never forget that initial connection to it, that moment. So for me, just to give you an example, is I was so excited when Star Wars was coming out, the original Star Wars. So I'm old enough to just remember a couple of years of my life when there was no Star Wars, right? And I was into Trek, and because they were rerunning it on TV, because I'm not that old. And I remember like they did the pre-order of the Star Wars figures, like the early bird figures, and it was like Leia, Luke, the droids, and Chewie, right? And I remember my mom getting the coupon and ordering that, and I was like, Luke Skywalker is going to be my favorite hero ever. And the movie starts, and and I'm like, this is awesome. And then Harrison Ford comes on, and my brain rewired, like legitimately rewired. Like I can literally, it was like reformatting everything you are because of that character. And it's my favorite, fictional character ever is Han Solo. And Harrison Ford, probably my favorite actor besides Jackie ever. But I remember I was a completely different person when I walked out of that theater. I'm like, Luke Skywalker, I didn't give a shit about Luke Skywalker. I love Luke Skywalker, but every Han Solo figure, all that stuff, and all that, all the stories about the character, the development of it. Like when Solo, the movie comes out, I love it because I'm learning all about this character that I love, all this. But you can remember that moment. What people want is to always try and always feel that connection to that moment. And at a certain point, this is going to sound really douchey, but you got to get over it. You know what I mean? Like you can never replicate that moment. Everybody, when anybody's making a movie or a show, they're not trying to make it bad. They're not trying to make it for you to hate it. Mm-hmm. They're trying to make something good that's for a mass audience. You know what I mean? It's not for you. It's for everybody. Like when we did Transformers, the irony of Transformers was when we were brought in, it was supposed to be the adult Transformers, the dark adult Transformers, right? And to me, it was, we're going to make what they didn't get in the movies, right? We're going to have character stuff. We're going to have action. We're going to have all this stuff, right? And I'm going to squeeze as many toys as I can in there, many characters as I can in there, all that stuff. And the irony, I'm really talking out of school, was Netflix was when they do their analytics and they tell you, like a ton of people watch the show. All these people watch the show. Mm-hmm. Problem is, people your age were watching it with their kids. I said, well, what's the problem with that? They go, well, we have kids shows. We need the kids to watch. The adult shows, blah, blah, blah. It ended up being a generational thing. And I was like, how's that a problem? But that's their analytics, right? It doesn't matter how many people watched it. It was all that stuff. It was like, but now how many kids are you going to get years from now who are going to watch Transformers because that was their starting point? Mm-hmm. Like, they don't think that far. But also Netflix doesn't own the property. Hasbro are ecstatic. They're sitting there go, great, kids are buying the toy. Like they told me one time, I've told this story before, so I apologize. I was in a conference room at Hasbro in Rhode Island, and I was sitting at a giant conference table. It's literally, I'm not joking, 25 people on one side of the table and me on the other, right? And I have a cup of tea with a straw in it, like I always do. I always have a tea and a straw. Mm-hmm. And we were talking something creatively. I was showing them footage and all that stuff. They were great. And it's everybody from every different department of Transformers, the brand team, the marketing team, the books, and the toy designers, and all that shit. And I'm not joking. It's like one of these giant conference rooms. And we said something like, they say, well, can you do this in the show or something? Well, creative suggestion. They were really good with that stuff. So they didn't impose anything. But, mm-hmm. They'd ask, like, what about this? And I said, guys, if I do that, the fan base is going to kill me. And the head of the brand said to me, he goes, FJ, you have to look at this table, this big table, like it's the Transformers audience. Okay? In this day and age, thanks to credit cards and online sales and all this thing, we know who's buying the toys, when they're buying the toys, where they're buying the toys, who they're buying the toys for. And we base everything on that. He goes, and you see your cup of tea with the straw? I said, yeah. He goes, that's everybody who texts or messages you, calls you out on Twitter, etc. And you stir the straw and they just get in a frenzy. And guess what? They're all watching the show. They're all buying the toys anyway. You need to make a show that's for everybody and not just this. And it blew my mind, right? It blew my mind. It confirmed what we had been doing was the right way to do it. Which was, how do we create a welcoming entry point into this world that's colorful and fun, even though it was a dark show. And we got that. We got that with that, which is, kids watched it and grown-ups watched it because it was guys our age sort of going, oh, that looked like when I was a kid and now I can introduce my kid to it. And Netflix didn't want that. They wanted Castlevania. They wanted all this other stuff. So it became that's why we didn't do more of them, because they wanted, different direction of which they never figured out, supposedly.
And Netflix seemed to have a little bit of an aversion to longevity.
Yeah, well, because they don't own the IP, right? So it's like they're not getting a piece of the toy sales and all this. So I sort of understand it too, because not a cheap show, despite what some people on Twitter will tell you. It wasn't a cheap show, and they need these brands to bring people in to watch and all that stuff. But again, that's another conversation for another 8 hours of streaming versus regular broadcast and cable and all that stuff. But which is why people are on strike now anyway. So it becomes a different thing. You know what I mean? It's like I said, I loved it. And I was really lucky to do the show, and it was a dream come true to do it. It's my only dream is to make a kung fu movie, but there's no market for a non-Hong Kong dude from New York to make these movies.
No, at the moment, but we'll see. We'll see how the Chinese streaming service has started to kind of produce a huge amount of content. I was over on, I know Frank's quite often on the Fat Samurai's channel, and
I've done that a few times. They asked me to do it a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't do it.
You should go. Preston's a really good dude. I think you guys would enjoy chatting. He's a smart guy and a fun guy.
I enjoy doing the Samurai show. He's a great guy.
He's great, and
we spoke about this thing on it too, which I always enjoy.
Oh yeah, I hadn't done one of those yet, but we spoke about Eye for an Eye, which was kind of quite a new, made for streaming, kind of really good martial arts movie, very kind of steeped in Zatoichi kind of elements, and we're semi coming full circle because sort of that type of era of Japanese cinema I found out about through Frank Miller. We're back to Frank Miller, through him doing the covers for the Lone Wolf and Cub comics.
He's a big Zatoichi fan. I, for a period, was hanging out with Ryuhei Kitamura, who directed Versus.
Oh, great film!
And at the time when I was doing The Spirit, and Frank loved that movie. So I got Kitamura to send a signed Japanese movie poster for Versus because they both loved each other's work. I admittedly, Japanese cinema is not my strong point outside of Kurosawa and sort of the big heavy hitters, because I was more an anime guy, and then on the live action side was all Hong Kong stuff. So I'm a novice to all that stuff. The Zatoichi stuff is different. The Godzilla stuff's different. Like I just saw Shin Kamen Rider, which I was very excited about.
And we've got more Shin Godzilla coming, or Godzilla -1.
Yeah, the trailer looks great. The trailer looks really, really good.
Yeah. They're interesting. There's kind of so much kind of great, really kind of great new anime also still coming out of Japan. I think they've kind of been consistently really good about kind of keeping enough of their essence whilst also kind of allowing themselves to kind of integrate with the Western world. So I know that Netflix has been commissioning more and more and kind of picking up more and more series, and there's still so much cool stuff happening. I think some of the live action adaptations of some anime have been phenomenal. So Rurouni Kenshin, Netflix really have picked up all the worldwide rights to those films that are absolutely mind-blowingly good. I think kind of some of the
my fingers are crossed for Gundam live action, because that director Jordan Vogt Roberts, who did Kong and all that stuff, he's an anime fanatic, like a legit anime fanatic. So I'm hoping his live action Gundam is good, and I have a feeling they'll give him a lot of money to do that kind of thing.
But I think that we're getting to a point where those sorts of things, I think we've had a few projects that have worked for good test indicators of how to do basically kind of big live action mech moving effectively. Like Pacific Rim almost got there. I think kind of some of the Pacific Rim stuff's all right, but I don't think
I love
quite.
Pacific Rim. I love it. Again, but I love world building. I love like Pacific Rim. Like it feels like somebody hacked my brain and just said, "What are all the things you like?" and we're going to put it on screen. And then the producer in me goes, "Oh, how did you spend all that money on that and do this?" And like I'm always at odds with it, but I love that franchise. I don't think they've capitalized on it at all. And the company that did Transformers for me, the animation company, did the Pacific Rim anime also. So it'd always be like every time I was in Tokyo, like sneaking around people's desks, like, like, let me see.
Do you play games at all as well, Frank?
No, I'm just wrestling games, Star Wars games, and FIFA, and that's the extent of my gaming these days.
Okay. I ask because I'm a kind of a very much a casual, a vacationing gamer. I would never call myself a diehard, but periodically I will kind of dive into kind of certain titles. And From Software, the kind of Japanese company, are so far and ahead in terms of the storytelling and the gameplay and the mechanics of their games. So good, and they're going back to their roots with their next game. They've been kind of doing Dark Souls and Bloodborne, these sort of games, for the last few years, but they have a history in basically anime and mech games, and their next release is going to be kind of another Armored Core game, which looks very cool. So I think awesome. If there was ever a time to jump into that or dip your toe back into that world, now is the time, because some of the footage, I'll send you a link to the trailer for that.
Please,
it looks very, very cool.
I think some of the best storytelling is in video games. It's no one's quite figured out how to adapt these things in live action until Last of Us, which I think is going to open the door up for some stuff, but also how you translate that is a tricky process.
Yeah, because it's hard, because I think it's such an interactive medium when people are playing the game. Like, they're getting so much out of it by essentially kind of controlling the character. So once you remove that element from it, how do you replicate that through the storytelling in a way that's engaging without...
That's why they can never do a GTA movie, because, the idea is like giving you the power to run people over, or smack somebody around randomly. So like, once you take that, like you're saying, once you take that out, it's just, hey, it's Miami Vice, or it's whatever, thing it was inspired by that week.
Yeah. I think if anyone can crack that nut, Hideo Kojima, the guy who did Death Stranding, he's sort of merging the two worlds together. So I think, but again, I think they just work quite comfortably as games, and I think there doesn't always need to be a crossover. And at this point, the games industry making so much more money than...
Well, that was the problem we had with Tekken, was sort of like, we were looked upon by the games team in particular as this sort of like thorn in the side. Like, if the show sucks, you impact our business, which I understood, but they didn't want to collaborate as much as, say Hasbro, where you sit there and go, tell me what you want, and I'll figure out a way to tell this story. They were just like, and then they eventually sort of, once they started to see what we put together, they went, oh, okay, we sort of get it now. Stuff like that. But it took years to get to that point.
It's a shame, because I think they can be, in some ways, that they're slightly different. They're slightly different audiences, and I think that they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot by not recognizing that there will be a bunch of people who would watch an anime version of some games, but would never want to actually pick up and play the game.
Right. That was the initial approach with Tekken, was sort of, it took place during a certain era of the franchise, where the idea was, if you liked this, you could go play the game and learn something, come into it sort of knowing some stuff, and how it serviced the game franchise both backwards and forwards. Like it was things like that. Those were things we actively thought of in terms of how to service the franchise as a whole and feel part of it, as opposed to being the interlopers who just went off and did whatever they wanted. Sort of, those are the lessons I've learned over the years of dealing with these, properties, as they call them now. This IP is, how do you service everybody? How do you create something that's welcoming and not insular and respectful of whatever this thing is, and respectful of its history, respectful of its audience, all that stuff. And it's at times not easy, where creative might lead you in a direction that might not appeal to everybody, but is better to serve the story that way, and it's a tricky dance. It's a very, very tricky dance.
I can imagine it's a minefield, because I think kind of fans are also incredibly weirdly whether it's, I'm sure you can sort of predict certain trends, but I find it very strange when you look at different what different people get pissed off about at different times. Like
no. That's to your point. Is you'll never
please everybody.
You'll never get something that everybody goes, yep.
Yeah.
It's just, especially in this day and age, with social media, you're just not going to do it, right? Yeah. But it also creates a sort of vacuum where you don't understand the general audience in terms of how to appeal to them and how to, get everybody. But that's a whole other story in itself.
It's bizarre, man. I find that I look at how much people kind of are critical of certain aspects. I mean, we just mentioned Indiana Jones, and I looked at kind of some of the backlash and people kind of bemoaning what that project was. Whereas versus my little corner of the world, when I'm speaking about kind of releases of movies that came out 30 years ago, that you could take a trilogy like, I know you guys are doing Fight Back to School, and that's arguably slightly more coherent in terms of that character kind of flowing through, but not entirely. Like he's a very different dude in part 3 than he is in part 1.
He's a disaster. Like I don't think I had seen it.
Okay.
So I know I'd seen the first 2, but I didn't remember the third one at all, if I had seen it.
Because it's him doing the bodyguard, weirdly.
Oh my God. So when, we prepped for that and I had to watch like the tonal shift, it's like, it's just insane. And, whereas the first 2 are really good, really, really good. But again, when you do these commentaries, it's like, you're not on these commentaries to shit on the movie. You know what I mean? Like you can explain why it doesn't work or it didn't hit with the audience or whatever, and different director and all this stuff. But it's just, some of these things are just so weird anomalies, especially that era, that we're talking about. And admittedly, I missed a lot of the Stephen Chow stuff in the theaters. I think the first one I saw in theaters was Love on Delivery. And King of Comedy is one of my all-time favorites because, and I'm hoping that pops up. There's I think we're doing, I shouldn't say this out loud, but I think there's a couple of Stephen Chow things we're doing next year, Frank and I. I just don't remember which ones. I think it's still the pre.
I think I'm safe to say you're not getting yourself into trouble, but I can certainly say in possibly unrelated element that BBFC is currently given the yes approval to From Beijing with Love. So that's going to be
that might be the one we're doing. But I want to do King of Comedy in particular because I think that's a masterpiece. I actually love that trilogy, sort of like King of Comedy, Shaolin Soccer, Kung Fu Hustle. Like that era is perfect, right? And it's like an escalation of his work. But there's something about King of Comedy that just clicks with me, and I think because I saw it with an audience who were like losing their minds, and Frank's really good at pointing those things out, like that when they're like very sort of Hong Kong or Chinese specific jokes that go over, so like I'll be in it and they're laughing and I'm like, I don't get it and stuff like that. But what you can see with the Stephen Chow stuff as it keeps going is it becomes more worldly, like more, even though Kung Fu Hustle in particular is an homage to a lot of different things in cinema. Like it's inherently funny all the way through that you can get 95% of it.
Yeah.
Whereas,
very, very sort of slapstick. I think it kind of owes more to like the Marx Brothers than it does.
Right. Whereas like Fight Back to School, when we're doing Fight Back to School, like Frank's really good. It's not out yet, right? It's not out.
No, it's been slightly delayed.
Really good at pointing out like the cultural aspects of it and why this joke worked, and that's a lot of the early Stephen Chow stuff like that. Not early, whatever that period that is for him.
I know what you mean.
But there's a lot of cultural stuff to it that I find personally really I didn't know about till Frank was sort of explaining all this stuff to me.
It's a lot of it's quite impenetrable to our ears because I think unless you have a pretty deep understanding of Cantonese, because so much of it's like wordplay, right? He was fascinated by that kind of, I guess the closest parallel in English would be like double entendres or sound alikes or kind of puns, right? But lots of words sound like other words, and so he's dancing and playing around with those sort of stuff a lot, which, like you say, for me too.
Frank's great at that. Frank's really good at sort of explaining, here's why this is funny, and then when you go back and watch it, it's like, okay, now I get this now. It's great.
Yeah. And his revised subtitles always help with that as well, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, for me, like, I really, as much as I love doing the Jackie stuff, like the classic Jackie stuff, I think the most fun stuff we've done is like Iceman Cometh or On the Run and the Stephen Chow stuff. The things that I have an affinity for, but don't have wasn't as obsessive about like I was with the Jackie stuff, where I just incessantly watched over and over and over again in theaters and all that stuff, or somehow would miss in a theater and stuff like that. Like Iceman Cometh, I guarantee I didn't see that in a movie theater. Whereas On the Run, I did by accident. And then, it's been this, and that's why I appreciate these guys putting all this care into it, where they're finding these movies that, are like, another one that I really loved doing was God of Gamblers. And because, again, they're almost like a lot of these are new to me. Yeah, I can't wait to get mine. Frank probably hogging it somewhere. So, like, it's easy. Like, we just did Twin Dragons, right? I'll give you an example. I shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm going to say it anyway. Is usually when we do these movies, Frank gives me a link from who's ever putting it out to the remaster. And so the problem is sometimes they're not subtitled yet, right? So, which is tricky if it's God of Gamblers or Fight Back to School, which I don't, sort of have memorized in my head. So I'll dig up the old DVDs or whatever and just rewatch them. Because I have a lot of them. But for Twin Dragons, he sent me, the remaster, which was beautiful, but it didn't have subtitles. And I realized my DVD's in storage somewhere. So I went into that commentary having not watched it. Right? Like recently. Like I probably haven't watched it in 20 years. And literally the second the movie starts in black and white and all that stuff, it all comes, there's David Chang, there's blah, 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 like, just it all came back. Like you knew which scene was coming, all that stuff. Like I can do that with all the Jackie, like the big Jackie stuff. You know what I mean? Like
I love that movie. I feel out of his back catalog, it's the one that I kind of feel often gets the most maligned from that era of the Hong Kong stuff.
I don't know if it gets maligned. It's just sort of forgotten. Like it's this weird, and it's like, especially in the beginning, like the star power of Maggie in particular. Like the Maggie's fascinating to me because she's so revered, especially from the Wong Kar-wai stuff, later on. But like her and Iceman Cometh, you know what I mean? Like you're sitting there, like she never played a role like this ever. You know what I mean? Like she's playing this, prostitute who does the, blah, 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 like all these weird things. And I was like, why did she do that movie at that time? You know what I mean? Like, and then you realize like the next year she does the Wong Kar-wai stuff and sort of goes in this whole thing. It occasionally shows up in a Jackie movie. You know what I mean? Like, out of respect, I'll be the girlfriend and Super Cop and all that stuff. But it gives me just such an appreciation of, these movies stand the test of time, and we made like 3 of these a year. It's like, what? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, it's Heart of Dragon or something like that. Like Frank was explaining, we did a Heart of Dragon commentary, which luckily was to the Japanese cut. I forget who it's for. I get confused who does what.
I think you guys are on the Arrow US.
Arrow one, and because it has the weird like neon cover.
Yeah.
And but it was fascinating to sort of go through that, which was another one like I probably didn't have to. And the funny thing is, my introduction, because I had missed it in the theater, I only knew the Japanese cut of it until like I had a VHS of the Japanese cut of it, and then years later, like got the Hong Kong. What is this, right? Like
bit of a bummer by comparison, isn't it?
But Frank was telling me how like he would run from one set to the other, sort of doing these movies, and it was really fascinating. Like, did we do Lucky Stars? We did some of the Lucky Star stuff, or we were talking about the Lucky Star stuff, and it was just like, yeah, my Lucky Star. I'm sorry, in Twinkle Twinkle, he's injured. Like he's injured on doing this other movie. Can't do the end. So Sammo does the fight. I mean, it's just like you could never do that shit today. Like they'd shut the movie down and all that stuff. It's this bizarre assembly line of such high quality stuff and innovative stuff. that, and it's an era in particular that can't be replicated in any way, shape, or form because of the people involved. You know, like I just, you know, this is one that's not on any sort of Blu-ray DVD, but luckily they showed it at the Sammo thing at the Academy. Was they showed painted faces, and you know, I hadn't seen that, and I couldn't tell you the last time I saw it, and so it was like a brand new movie to me, and it held up. It's not as good as I remember. Like I remember it being much more as an artsy film, but it's just more like snapshots in time of these people. And what was fascinating about it was you didn't realize it was like the end. It's a movie about an end of an era.
Yeah.
Of the Peking opera schools and stuff like that.
Of that particular type of training school. Yeah.
And then you realize that those guys, in particular Sammo, Yunview, and Jackie, sort of ignite that next era. You know what I mean? Like, and there's other variables in it. There's other directors and producers, but like in terms of then there's that era, which for me sort of starts to, you know, it's funny now. Like I sort of, you talk about checking out on Star Wars. I never check out, but to me the waning thing is like First Strike, Mr. Nice Guy, Who Am I, blah, blah, blah. But for some people, that's their high point, right? And it's funny now, like we did the commentary for Gorgeous and stuff like that, where I was just like, oh, this is all better than I thought. The problem is him trying to get everybody to speak 10 different languages in these movies because they want, you know, all these different, you know, international sales and stuff like that. Like if they just did these movies in Chinese, they'd be so much better. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. So I'm hoping, you know, like like I have these Holy Grail Jackie ones that we haven't done yet or haven't seen, like Thunderbolt and
Thunderbolt's way up there for me too. I love
Thunderbolt, which I just rewatched and it's fine. But like,
so still holds up.
Yeah, it's like that post sort of Rumble era is something I'm waiting on to sort of re-explore. Like as opposed to just go back and rewatch them now, I'm waiting for who's ever going to get the rights to those. I know, like especially like Rumble and First Strike with the Warner Brothers of it all.
That's a weird bummer. I think I've heard a couple of podcasts when Warners have kind of alluded to the fact that they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place a little bit. I think where they're focusing their attention as a company is elsewhere. But I'm hoping that there'll be a trickle down effect. I think, given that Disney are kind of financially challenged at the moment, and particularly with what's going on with the writer's strike, I suspect that Disney's going to slightly reinvest themselves in physical media a little bit over the next couple of years.
I think they're going to have to. And, you know, all these places are going to, but, you know, the thing is, and I'm sure I mentioned this earlier, is Warner Brothers has a beautiful Hong Kong print of Rumble in the Bronx and First Strike. I just saw them.
And Pedicab Driver and so many more, man. They've got a long list.
They showed Pedicab Driver at the Sammo thing at the Academy. And
how did it look?
I didn't see it. No, I didn't go see it. I was out of town. And I was having dim sum with Frank. And so, yeah, there's certain Holy Grail ones like that. I need somebody to do a 4K Eastern Condors and a 4K Armor of God. But then that whole post-Rumble era, Rumble On, you know, sort of needs to, and Thunderbolt and stuff like that. There's very, you know, and then more of the Stephen Chow stuff. And, you know, I'm waiting for somebody to do some of the other Yunbei ones like Peacock King and that era of stuff where he sort of goes off on his own, which they've already done Iceman, Cometh, and On the Run, which, you know, like are perfect. And stuff like that, like a lot of the Sammo stuff. But I mean, look, I always, you know, me being completely unknowledgeable in the current state of the rights and all this, will constantly text Frank lists of stuff like, what about this movie? What about this movie? What about this movie? And he'll be like, well, you can't because of this, and you can't because of that. Like all the John Woo stuff, can't touch those, and you know, which is insane. And you know, but I've got my Holy Grail ones, but also the desire to reconnect as a fan with an era that I probably not maligned, but sort of dismissed a little too easily. That post-Rumble era, that people. That sort of generation after mine, you know, that sort of didn't have the luxury of going to Hong Kong movies and stuff like that. But it's like that post-Rush Hour, Rumble success Jackie era, that global success era of movies, I think I dismissed too easily.
There's still some wee gems in there. I think kind of Who Am I still have a lot of time for, and even The Accidental Spy. And
yeah, I don't remember any of these movies. Like I know I have them and I know I've seen them, but again,
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when you go back to them again.
25 years ago, it's a very different mindset than I am now. You know, like
me too, man. And same with even CZ12. I think I know that's even within Jackie Chan fans that has a tendency to kind of get ragged on a little bit, but I still really like it. I think it's a nice end of the loop to his kind of.
It's fine. It's better than most of the other stuff. You know what I mean? Like, look, you got to accept the fact the guy is going to be 70 next year, right? And that he's still doing it. And that's what I was saying about before. It's like, that's why I can't be angry or mad at anything. Like, dude, what are you asking for if he's 70 years old? You know what I mean? Like, I just watched Ride On. It took me like 2 days to watch it. You know what I mean? Like
just watching 20-minute chunk.
Yeah, watch it like here's 40 minutes. Watch 20 minutes, all that stuff, and it's just like these movies aren't made for the same audience they were making even Accidental Spy in that era for. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you know, and that's why he doesn't do American movies anymore. You know what I mean? Like, do the kid like he's doing the Turtles voiceover. You know what? That's exactly what he should be doing at 70. You know what I mean? Like, when you take a step back, and again, what I was talking about before, disconnecting from that catalyst moment of where you first connected to and what your era of Jackie is. You know what I mean? Like, the dude is 70 years old. He's not jumping off the roof. You know what I mean? Like, and you got to accept it. And even things when you learn certain stunts that 30 years ago you were told were Jackie were not Jackie. It's like, I don't care, dude. No, it entertained me. You know what I mean? Like, but there's some people get hung up on that. Like, oh, when he jumps off the parking lot and Rumble in the Bronx, that's not him. It's like, I don't care. Someone did it and told a good story, and I enjoyed it. You know, and that was the joy of seeing, like I said, Rumble with an audience of people who mostly had never seen it on a big screen or seen it at all before because it's not really easily available, this version of it, just lose their minds over it. You know what I mean? Like, stuff's never going to go away.
It's really weird though, man, because those same people that criticize that, and I see it coming up a lot with some of the kicks and stuff at the end of Dragons Forever, and those same people who are
that's another one of my big favorites. That
it's an amazing
movie. Commentary for that I absolutely.
Yeah, you guys got to do the 4K.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's one of my big. By the way, that was the first movie as a teenager. I took a girl with me, and she was like trying to kiss me during the movie, and I was like, you know, like, no, like, I'm never going to see this for another year. You know, like, just watch the goddamn movie. You know, like that kind of thing. I was like 13, 14 or something like that, maybe 15. But you know, like, took a girl into the city to see it, and she was like, okay, this is cool. Like, she wasn't dismissing it, but she was like, yeah, mama. And I was like, no, like, we can get something to eat after and make out later. But the, you know,
an uncomfortable date movie though. Jackie's character, particularly in that, is pretty hard.
But again, you know, it's funny because, and we talked about that on the commentary, which was sort of like, you know, he's so. I think that's one of the reasons why I like it is that they're all so differently cast in it, and I think it's sort of low key Yumbia's funniest moments in that movie, especially his introduction. And again, that's another one we did the Japanese version for, so it had the extra therapy scenes and all that stuff
really great.
that are just crack me the hell up. And but I love that movie so much in that. I always loved the three of them together, and it always broke my heart that they didn't do anything more after that. Now that window's long gone. Yeah. And
I really, I so wish that I can't remember what it was that he was doing, but I wish that Jackie could have been there for Millionaires Express. I think I adore Millionaires Express as it stands just now, but that dude who's playing the sort of cowboy-ish character that rolls into town, you can totally tell was basically that part was designed for Jackie, you know, and he just
and it really messed up the gang. It really, you know, it sort of drove that wedge for a little bit, and sort of broke my heart. There's an interesting. I don't think they showed Millionaires Express at the Sammo thing. They might have. What I tried to do was see the ones that were on 35 millimeter versus the digital projection stuff. So it's like 2 or 3, you know, that were the one was Project A, which was the I had to see, and that was digital. But the cool thing is, and a lot of people might not know this, and I don't think it's up yet, where they actually filmed a new interview. The Academy filmed a new interview with Sammo for this event. So someone went to Hong Kong and filmed him in a movie theater. So each movie that they showed during the festival had like a 2 or 3 minute sort of interview with Sammo about that movie. And what they said was it wasn't edited all together, but it would end up on the Academy site somewhere. So I don't know if it's there or whatever the longer interview is. So
I'll check, and if it is, I'll put it underneath.
Keep an eye on for that, because there were some fascinating tidbits in that where like he was talking about, I forget, like with Eastern Condors, he was just like, yeah, I just wanted to, you know, tell a old-fashioned war movie, and we didn't have that. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, and just the impetus behind that, and you know, especially the painted faces stuff was really fun. Sort of talking about why he took the role, because he almost felt like, you know, he could do it right, you know, in terms of displaying. But he was talking about how basically like painted faces is still like the sanitized version of what they went through as kids and stuff like that. And his interview with Project A, where he just basically makes fun of Jackie the whole time. You know, it's just like, yeah, he didn't know what he was doing. I directed half the movie. And stuff like, you know, like really funny, like, you know, like sort of with a wink and a nod kind of thing. But it's really good. So yeah, that's welcome to my life.
It's a wonderful life that you have lived. And before I forget to kind of close the loop on kind of what we were just sort of saying about fandom, because I think the reason why I mentioned Dragons Forever is because I see people on posts constantly bemoaning the fact that Jackie's not doing every single one of those kicks in every single one of the fights. But those same people will look at Enter the Dragon and say, "Oh yeah, it's Ewan Wallace doubling for Bruce because Bruce couldn't somersault." It's like, well, wait a minute. Why is it okay in one instance
because
and not in another?
The Jackie myth was always presented as the guy who does all the stunts, you know, and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas, you know, for Bruce, it's a flip. I mean, there's more Bruce stuff that isn't Bruce, you know, I'm sure, that we don't know about, etc. And the problem is, as these, you know, sort of the medium gets better and you can see better versions of these movies, you can point these things out better. I forget what movie it was where we were like, we kept noticing like, oh, that's not this person. That's not this person. Like, oh, it's very, what was it? Righting Wrongs, or it was,
yeah.
We didn't do commentary for. I wish I did the commentary for Righting Wrongs because it's one of my favorites. But like the one thing we were talking about was sort of like you can point out even more, especially the female stuff, like where it's like the stunt guys doing all that stuff. Like the problem is when they made those movies back in the day, they didn't know 35 years from now somebody was going to have a crystal clear version of it that they could point out.
Yeah, they were made for the cinema, and once they were done being screened at the cinema, that was kind of it. And as we said earlier, they didn't even often keep the negatives. You know, they didn't. Stuff just got recycled, and I think hindsight is always 20/20, right? I think kind of we always look back on things with crystal clear vision, but at the time, people don't know what's going to be coming forward, and I think it's incredible. I do think we're kind of in a golden age just now for getting this sort of stuff. And
it's going to continue a little bit because there's stuff out there, and what little I know about what's coming out in the next year or so, you know, based on what I hear from Frank and sort of the scuttlebutt, it's only going to get better, and we're all going to be broke. That's what I've learned from this. But it's worth it. It's worth it, especially if we can get some of those, you know, those real gems out there that, you know, like seeing In the Line of Duty and stuff like that sort of pop up, and never imagined these things would come out that way and treated so respectfully. Like you know, all these Arrow and 88 and Eureka, everybody just treats it all with such respect. And that's amazing to me. And it's thrilling. And I feel like I'm very, very lucky to have this little voice to talk about these things, to meet people like you and nerd out and really dig deep into the files of my brain that haven't been accessed in a long time, sort of talk about these movies and these experiences that now they all, you know, mean something more than what they did when I was a kid.
I'm really happy that you're doing it, and I hope I will nudge Frank as well and to ask him to get you on as many as possible, because really I'm very excited that you're doing the kind of Fight Back to School stuff, because there are particularly those first two movies I absolutely adore, and I even have a soft spot for the third. I think it's I mentioned it in relation to the fact that people give so much of Hong Kong cinema a pass in the fandom. if the trilogies don't always kind of cohesively hold together, but they lose their shit if it's delayed by a week. And I'm always amazed at like the sliding scale of irritation that kind of goes with fans, where they always seem to be quite happy when they're bitching about stuff. And I'm just happy they're coming, man. I think if something's a couple of weeks late, I never mind, and my bank balance is always pretty happy too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It allows me to space it out a little bit, so I totally get it. But thank you for having me on this.
And thank you so much for sitting with me. I'm going to let you go very soon because I'm conscious that you've almost given me 2 hours. But you did 2 little projects, 2 little films with another one of my heroes, with Grant Morrison, and I was going to...
Oh, I was lucky on those. There was director Patrick Meany who did those, and I met him when he was putting the Grant thing together, and it was just through mutual friends where I helped them get a distribution deal for it and gave notes on it and all that stuff, and the Warren Ellis one. And then they just sort of went off and did their thing once they were established. But Patrick, I just had lunch with him a couple of weeks ago, but I was more just like a sort of, friend helping out on those things. But also because I wanted to see those stories get told, because I love those creators. So it was fun to sort of, watch those things come together, and Patrick's really talented at sort of telling those stories of those creators in a way that I don't think, anybody else could do.
They're both great films. I'll kind of leave links down to trailers for those below as well for people to see. Well, thank you very, very much again.
Of course.
For sitting down with me, and we will at some point maybe do a part 2 after Fight Back to School's come out, and we can kind of chat more Stephen Chow when I am in a proper room without light fading fast. I think it's pitch black outside. It's almost midnight here.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Andrew.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, FJ.
Cheers.